like to call the meeting to order in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, PL 1975, Chapter 231, adequate notice of this regular meeting of the Board of Adjustment of the Township of Franklin has been provided. Would you call the roll, please?
Raymond Bettervid.
Here.
Laura Grauman asked to be excused. Donald Johnson asked to be excused. Bruce McCracken.
Here.
Alan Rich.
Here.
Robert Shepard.
Here.
Anthony Caldwell.
Here.
Gary Rosenthal asked to be excused. Joel Reese asked to be excused. Cheryl Bagallo.
Here.
And Chairman Thomas.
Here. So we now have,
Yeah. 1, 2.
perfect, okay. First item on the agenda, discussion vouchers, Patrick Bradshaw Resolution Work 26250.
3 in a row.
Various matters, 385, April through June. We need a motion.
I move the motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. In the hearings section, Corporate Community Connection, ZBA 17-00001, use variance and site plan with variances in which the applicant seeking to construct a 4-story mixed-use development, commercial and residential, at 610 Franklin Boulevard, Block 233, lots 7 through 14, 31 to 36, in the HBD zone. This is carried to October 5th, and no further notification is needed. If you're here for that hearing, it will be October 5th. The first one on the agenda, Lindsay Steyer Taylor, ZBA 17-00018, hardship variance in which the applicant is seeking an approval for a garage that receives a permit approval but was built in the wrong location at 1319 Canal Road, Princeton, Block 9, Lot 9.06 in the Canal Preservation Zone.
Mr. Chairman, I'll give a quick summary. The Technical Review Committee report that's in your packet gives a history of how this occurred. Apparently, the previous property owner received a permit to build a detached garage. The zoning requirement was that it had to be placed 50 feet from the property line. They went to the historic district, got approval for the garage. Then when that previous property owner actually built it, they built it 36.1 feet from the property line. This homeowner subsequently purchased the property. They received a notice from the construction department that they had open permits on that garage. Part of that process is submittal of an as-built survey, and that's where it was discovered, again, that it was placed 36.1 feet from the property where 50 feet is required. In the memo and in the packet as well is the survey that shows the location of the garage. There's an aerial that shows on the second page of the memo on the top, it shows the location of the garage and basically that it's surrounded by trees to surrounding property owners. And then there's photos of the garage, again, consistent with what the Historic Commission had reviewed and approved.
Okay, first we have to swear you in.
Yeah, if you'll pick up the microphone, is it on?
Yes, I just turned it on.
Should be, yeah.
Thanks. If you raise your right hand for me, solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And just tell us who you are for the record.
Lindsay Steyer Taylor.
Okay, I'll try and make this short. You bought the property and inherited the problem.
Correct.
And do you see any of your people that you noticed sitting here tonight?
I do not.
I, for one, am satisfied with the outline that Mark gave and the pictures that are enclosed in the packet. Does anybody need any more information?
No.
No.
But technically open it to the public.
Yeah, we'll open it to the public. Anyone that wants to speak about this or ask a question, we'll close. We'll take a motion.
Motion approved. Second.
Raymond Bettervid.
Yes.
Bruce McCracken.
Yes.
Alan Rich.
Yes.
Robert Shepard.
Yes.
Anthony Caldwell. Cheryl Bagallo.
Yes.
Chairman Thomas.
Yes, it was only a short visit, but I think the peace of mind eventually will be worth it. All right, good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, on the agenda, Ananda Mandir, ZBA 15-00024, amended site plan with use variance and appeal in which the applicant is seeking to amend the use variance and preliminary and final site plan approval to add second-floor living quarters at 369 Cedar Grove Lane, Somerset, Block 508.02, Lot 5.02 in the R40 zone. This was carried from July 6th, and there is no further notification. All yours.
Hang on. Sloopy, hang on, Sloopy.
Must be some terrifying testimony.
If you recall, I think that application was the first one where Mike Ford used TV to show the application, and since this is a continuation, I think we need to put that up, but I could start without him. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Peter Lanford. I am here on behalf of the applicant. The last time that this matter was before the board for a hearing was on June 1st, 2017. At that time, there was about 2.5 to 3 hours worth of testimony concerning our proposed amendments to a previously approved site plan. And there was a previously approved, actually there were two previously approved use variances. The first one was to construct a house of worship on the subject property on Cedar Grove Lane, Elizabeth Avenue. And the second one was to construct an expansion of the church and to construct a community hall. When we came in June, there were a lot of little changes to the plan. We presented testimony through Mr. Ford and Mr. Mystery, who were the two witnesses that testified that evening, of the minor expansion to the last rights room. We presented testimony showing our request to build or complete the construction of the banked parking, which was originally approved in the original application. We showed some plantings that the board, or actually the staff, had asked us to replant an area on the lot that we acquired. We also presented testimony concerning the modifications or changes to the gate at the entry of the property. There were a couple of minor bulk variances that were attendant to that. We also discussed, as part of the testimony through Mr. Mystery, to use the basement of the church for fellowship after services. There is currently an approved kitchen there, and we wanted to put some tables and chairs to use the basement of the church. The other testimony concerned changes to the existing dwelling. The existing dwelling is approved for 2 apartments. Those apartments are currently being occupied by the clergyman and by a caretaker. We wanted to finish the basement to use it as a meeting room, and also to add a second floor to the apartments for visiting clergy members, visiting speakers, and also for use perhaps by certain members of the congregation when services run late. So that was the gist of all of the testimony, and I tried to summarize 2.5 hours in about 2.5 minutes, but that was the testimony that we presented at the last meeting. There were certain questions concerning the operation of the temple and the community hall that were still left unopened, which I'm going to have Mr. Ashok Rakit testify to. He is the president of Ananda Mandir. I am also going to have Ms. Dolan testify this evening. There was a request that we do an analysis of all of the events and the need for the parking. And lastly, I will have Mr. O'Brien testify as to the need for the only variance, other than those two minor variances for the sign, are that we don't meet the conditional use standard only as to the parking. In all other respects, this application, both in 2009 and any amendments thereto, are in conformance with the zoning ordinance. Mike, did you bring and a computer?
Mr. Lanford, if I could just correct you in one way. That is true. The only additional, or the only D3 conditional use variance that you're asking for is parking, but one of the aspects of your application is to change or modify a number of the conditions of the prior approval. Because the board, and it outlined in my memo, in fact, one of the things as you were speaking was part of my memo on pages 2 and 3, I outlined there are probably 30 different conditions related to the use and operation of the site. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do at some point in the testimony is to have you go through those and identify which ones you're asking the board to modify.
Okay, and I think that we can discuss those at the end after all the testimony, because obviously the testimony will dictate what's going to be needs to be modified or does not need to be modified.
So the recommendation would be that all of the previous conditions would carry forward unless you specifically tell this board exactly what you want, what you're asking to change.
That is correct. While Mr. Ford is setting up the previously entered exhibit, I will call Mr. Rakit to testify.
I want to make sure that microphone is working. I'll just swear him in. Okay, sir. If you'll raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth?
Yes, I do.
Tell us who you are for the record.
Ashok Rakit.
Can you spell your last name for the record?
Yes, Rakhit.
Okay. You could put your, okay. Mr. Rakit, what is your involvement with Ananda Mandir?
I'm a member of the Board of Trustee and the current president.
And how long have you been involved with Ananda Mandir?
Oh, pretty much since the inception.
Okay. And can you tell the board the genesis of the Ananda Mandir Temple, how it came to be and where its roots are?
Yes. Obviously, as originally from India, there are, particularly from the northeastern part of India, from Bengal, and that part of India normally also we have different part of India having little bit different, sects of Hindu temples. So from Bengal, where we are from, there is another temple in Houston, Texas, and this one in this area was basically New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. We felt we needed a temple and a heritage center in New Jersey in a central area where members could come and attend activities.
Okay, so there are two specific temples related to Ananda Mandir in the United States.
Correct.
And one is in Houston and then the one here in
Correct.
Somerset.
So Ananda Mandir is a sect of the Hindu religion?
It's, sect. In Hindu religion, different part of, it's like your Presbyterian church or Orthodox, it's a different denomination, I guess.
Denomination, sect, yeah?
Yeah, so, yes,
Okay.
so that part of northeastern part of India, we normally have a certain deities and certain, they still follow general Hindu lunar calendar, but it's a little bit different from the southern or northern to northeast India. The practices are a little bit different, but it still comes from the same Hindu temples.
How old is it? When was it founded?
The temple was completed in 2004. I think the corporation was made around 1995 or so. It took us a while to raise the funds and obviously, get to where we are.
Okay. Now, Mr. Rakit, the members of your congregation then come from basically
The state of Bengal is one of the states.
But here in the United States, what is the general radius?
I would say tri-state, maybe 4 states between New Jersey primarily, obviously, the geographic location, and then Pennsylvania, New York, and Connecticut, I would
Okay.
say.
Now, the temple conducts services on a daily basis, is that correct?
Just twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening.
Okay. Now, for general religious services, weekday mornings and evenings, what time are the services in the morning?
Normally, morning is around 9 to 11. In the evening, normally 5 to 8, 7:30, 8 o'clock.
Okay, and generally, how many people attend those services?
Weekdays, I would say as low as 2, as high as 10. Sunday may get a little bit more, maybe 30 to 50, but in general, I would say 10, maybe mostly.
Okay, and that is consistent with the testimony that was proffered before this board in 2009. Those numbers really haven't changed.
No. The regular attendees about that. People come more on a special holidays based on the lunar calendar. Some are medium holidays, some are major holidays.
Okay, now with respect, you said the services are from 7 to 9. Does the service last 2 hours? How does, is that 2-hour service?
No, it's just the priest does the services, people come, they pray, they leave. It's not people necessarily sit for the whole services. Certain ritual the priest performs in the morning services and the evening services.
Okay, and then people can come in anytime?
They can just walk in during the time they know when temple is open and pray and then, sit few minutes, half an hour or whole if they want to. But in general, people come and leave.
Okay. Now, you said on Sunday, a routine Sunday, you have a little bit more.
Sunday evenings, obviously people, the weekends, so people come a little bigger number. But again, anywhere between, as I said, 20, 30, 40 people at the most. But again, they don't all come together. But in the evening time, they kind of spread out.
Okay. And that covers the bulk of the year. Now, in addition to that, you have certain other minor holidays and major holidays.
Correct.
Okay.
We have every month one full moon and new moon, 2 evenings. And then according to the lunar calendar, I would say about 10 to 15 minor holidays during the year, where people attend anywhere between 50 to 150, depending on not every minor holiday. If they are on a weekend or they may be a little more popular than the other holidays.
Okay.
It's normally 2 to 3 hour services and people come.
Okay, even with those minor holidays, and you say they're 2 to 3 hour services, again, do people come for the entire 2 to 3 hours, or do they?
Maybe 10% of them stay, some ladies stay till the end, but majority of the people come either at the beginning or toward the end of the services.
Okay. And you're aware that the resolution of approval when the temple was expanded limited the capacity of the worship area in the temple to 200 people. Is that correct?
Correct.
And basically, you are under that number.
Yes, most of the days,
Yeah.
including some of the minor holidays.
Okay.
Yes.
And now do you have also major events?
Yes, we have two primary major holiday, both around September, October. Dates change depending on the lunar calendar. One is for 5 to 6 days straight, and the other is one night. And those are the major holidays when we have much larger gatherings.
Okay. And when you say, well, first of all, you say it's 5 or 6 days. Do they run all day long? Does it run
Yeah.
how do they run?
Normally, they have activities both in the morning, depending again the calendar hour. Every year there is a religious calendar published all over India for the Hindu calendar, and every priest follows that. And that some way tries to relate to the lunar location and all the planets, I guess, in India, and then transfer to the location here. So time changes year to year, and the priest follows and announces. So people try to come. Normally, some activities in the morning to lunchtime, and then some activities then in the afternoon it may die off. In the evening with a closing ceremony and some dinner.
And during the course of a day on this 5 or 6 day event, how many people would you have on average coming to the facility or to the property?
Well, if you average time maybe 200. It's hard to tell which days. If it's middle of the weekday, it could be 50. If it's in the afternoon after work, could be 200, 300 people. Peak hour could be 400, 500. The cumulative around the day, I would say anywhere 800 to 1,000 from morning to evening. But nobody comes and stays on the day. They come depending when they work, and either before work, after work. Some retired people come middle of the day. So it really varies.
Okay, and then some of the events on these days take place within the confines of the temple, correct? Some of the activities.
Almost all activities in the temple, religious activities are within temple now
Okay.
that we have a bigger temple. Yeah.
Okay, and do you also for these days use the community hall?
Yes, some days in the major holiday may have some children because there are some children heritage schools. Sometimes they perform dance, music. Normally in the evening when temple activity kind of closing, that's the time they might, yes.
So consistent with the approval on these days or these major holidays, some of the activities take place in the temple, some of them take place in the community hall, but they don't take place in both buildings simultaneously.
No. Normally people we have a tradition after religious activities, there is some cultural activities on those major holidays, often by children or some adult performers, local artists.
Okay, and then you have lastly, the one major holiday, which is at the end of September or October, is that correct?
Correct.
And how many people, first of all, what are the hours of that?
That's the one, as I said, for 5 days. And it's normally throughout the day, normally more in the morning to lunchtime, and then in the evening to dinner.
Okay. And in the last 2 years, ever since you've gotten a temporary certificate of occupancy for the temple, and you've gotten a final certificate of occupancy for the community hall, correct?
Correct.
And after having obtained those, then you've worked with the township officials to orchestrate and coordinate those events so you can handle the on-site parking and, if need be, arrange for off-site parking. Is that correct?
Right. Like last year, we worked with the Joint Temple in Cedar Grove Lane, and also maybe procure if there is if the offices are closed. So we try to reach out in the neighbor parking area if we can have access, but again, it's difficult if there is no conflict with their activity, then yes. So, and then we get police also to handle the high traffic time.
Okay, and you made application this year for your events for this year.
Yes, we did. This year we happen to be more on the weekdays for the 5 days event. We don't expect maybe much less. Normally, if the core is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we get a lot more attendance. This year is starting Monday, ending middle of Saturday or something. So I think most of the time we probably will have less attendance than traditionally other years.
Okay. Now, you also have on the property in the community hall, is that
Correct.
correct? And what the purpose of the community hall, as was testified to in the previous application, is for cultural events and also some social events for the members, is that correct?
Correct. It could be cultural events organized by the Ananda Mandir or the community members and some private members events.
Okay, and you received the certificate of occupancy for the cultural center in 2016,
Correct.
and you have started to use that for certain activities.
Yes, subsequently, yes.
And can you indicate to the board what type of activities you have been using that hall for?
As I said, there are two kinds normally, either cultural activities where children or adults can play, dance, music, drama, or it could be members' events, somebody's birthday, anniversary, small wedding maybe, but mostly private members' events.
Okay, and you understood as part of the original approval that you cannot rent the hall out or have it used by non-members, is that correct?
Right. It is again, primarily, it's used for the members,
Okay.
but they are private events.
I'm hearing the words primarily and mostly. Can we have definitive?
Primarily means there are some members of us who come more often than others in terms of frequency, how often they use the temple activities. But they are still members of our temple.
What we want you to tell us is that the only people that are using
Are members only.
Okay, good.
Okay, I was going to clarify that, but he did. Okay. Now, since you've opened the hall, have you had some issues concerning, first of all, you were at the meeting the last time when Mr. Mystery testified that there is a potential occupancy based on the fire code of 818 people within that hall if it was fully occupied?
Yes.
Okay. Most of the events that you've had in the hall since you've opened it, what have been the general attendance numbers in the hall?
Well, we have right now having, because of the parking limitations, up to 400 probably used, but we are getting people asking for bigger size occupancy. We have hesitated because we really don't have enough parking. So whether it's a cultural activity where, or a private events, which are maybe a little bigger event, we expect to have 500, 600 people should be able to fit in between mezzanine and the hall. But till now, I would say because that we are limited pretty much to try to keep it within 400.
Okay. And therefore, the construction of the 117 bank spaces would be beneficial in helping you to efficiently run or...
To use the community. For temple, I think we are fine because temple capacity and the people come and go. I think that originally approved 200, 210, I don't remember exact number, is adequate. But for community hall, the size of the hall and the activity and the needs, I think that additional bank parking, and that was original thinking and the plan, but we did not have either funds or we did not plan to have both building together, which we subsequently did. So for the hall occupancy, we definitely would need and like to have that additional bank parking completed to manage it within the site.
Okay.
With that bank parking and the potential of 400 plus people, is that enough?
For Yeah, for every event except for that major holiday, which we have now worked, as the James Center does, as some of the other temples do, they work with the police to arrange for off-site parking, and they are doing that now. It will work for basically 359 days out of the year. The site would function within the confines of the property. For those 5 or 6 days when the high holy days happen, and they do apply for a permit to the municipality, they meet with the municipality, and based on their anticipated attendance, then they may have to provide shuttle transportation to off-site locations. This year, they submitted their application for the 5-day event, and I just got a call saying that based on the numbers, since it is a weekday event, everything can be handled on site. They do not need off-site parking for that event. So,
Except the night, the second event.
the one night, we still have to discuss that one night, right? But basically, for 359 days of the year, then whether we're using the hall or whether we're using the temple, everything can run efficiently on the property.
Okay, I was back there and, for a look, and the one thing I'll say is that you don't appear to have any hope of adding more parking. It's tight.
Well,
After you do the bank parking, and then the issue might become that we make sure that parking lot lighting is not intruding on the neighbors.
to answer, that was actually dealt with in the original application. The parking lot lights all have light shields on them. They're all on timers. And actually, the way, because as he indicated, for most days, when only the temple is functioning, the only parking they really need is the parking that's built. Those lights are on separate timers, and so we don't light the entire parking lot except when we need the entire parking lot.
Okay.
And that's all been done.
And that periphery parking normally goes off at 11 on timer.
Yeah.
If we need to use that, but most nights it's not used. It's not automatic even.
But I
turned
think
on.
we all need to consider that
Yeah.
with this application, it's kind of becoming a maxed out site. Because you're not going to put another parking lot,
No.
basically, not to add real parking.
Well, we don't, again, I don't think you want to add additional parking for 4 or 5 days or 402 days out of the year. That doesn't make any practical sense. I mean, we own that property next to the entry, which is all undeveloped, and we intend to keep it undeveloped at this time. We don't want to put parking in there and come back, because, again, if we unbank the parking spaces, they adequately service the community hall for all events. The parking that we currently have, as you heard the testimony, adequately services the temple. And when the high holy days come, then we work with the municipality to provide off-site parking. I don't think you want to add additional parking or try to
Okay,
create
well,
it.
I think we've conditioned it down a little bit. Way back when the original community hall proposal came, there was some sort of an idea that that was going to also be for cultural programs open to the public. That's not happening. That's conditioned out.
Well,
of the mix.
there are Indian programs that are cultural, and that's not to say if you wanted to attend the program, you can't show up. We can't rent it out for you who's a non-member to run a program.
Okay, is there a way those events are to occur to handle, to limit the crowd that shows?
Well, we do have, based on the certificate of occupancy, we are limited to 818.
I
So,
understand that, but you're having the event, people show up, who's going to throw them out?
if you don't let them in,
Well, do you have a plan?
Yeah,
to handle
so
that?
normally if we anticipate large events, we won't use this hall. We tell them go find a bigger hall. So we'll tell members, if you think you'll have 1,500 people, this is not a place you are looking for. This is our parking space, this is our community hall, occupancy is, so it's really, that's the limit. I mean, we are limited by the size of the building and the zoning. So and then it serves the purpose, because in the hall, if we get 500-600 people, because 18 is the total, so with 500-600 people, I think 300 plus parking would serve the need.
I'm getting convinced that you understand that. I'm just concerned about how you communicate to the people who may be hoping to attend the events, who don't realize that,
Right.
and show up, and now you have.
We have members request wedding party for bigger size. They said this is not a size. We are limited by the size we have.
Those events, I'm assuming you're going to have the part-time police
Yeah, absolutely.
who are going to be able to assist turning people away or helping them turn around and get out, because.
Yes, absolutely. And then that's what we do, like now, even in the temple holiday event. So if we think that there is going to be potentially larger crowd, then security will be added, just for everybody's benefit. People coming and for us also.
Okay, I don't want to take up your time.
No, I think the board needed to know, and I think that was the question raised by you, is how does this place work? So I think we did that, and then I think Ms. Dolan will sort of, from a traffic perspective, summarize all of that. I just need to hit on one other issue very briefly, because it was discussed at the last meeting with respect to the current residents on the property. The original approval was for two apartments.
Two-bedroom apartment.
Right.
Two-bedroom.
Okay. And while we're doing the last of the renovations, we wanted to do two things to that house. One is to add a second floor, and one was to utilize the basement for small meetings.
Right, so that we don't have to go to the big hall, and so it's just small. If priest wants to meet some member's family to discuss anything, so he can go down.
He'll have 1,700 square feet to do it in, right?
Huh?
He'll have 1,700 square feet to do it in. But he also is going to have 1,450 square feet in the basement of the community center, right? Why do you need
The
both?
community center doesn't have a basement.
The community center doesn't have a basement. The temple has a basement with a kitchen.
Right.
And
Okay,
what our
proposal,
proposal,
not the community center, the temple. Why do you need both?
That's for the dining area. That's because we have religious, vegetarian dining, and community hall is a non-vegetarian kitchen. So whenever there is an offering in the temple and it's served, it's normally vegetarian. So that's why, and it's normally temple size of the dining, we thought the 70, 72 should be adequate for the offerings when we need to serve vegetarian after the religious offering in the temple. Small temple, private services.
and just for the record, that goes on now. You use the kitchen
We have the approved kitchen, but we do not have approval for the,
for people to sit down and eat, but you have an approved kitchen
request.
down there.
But the tables and the chairs, they'll be movable, right? It's not going to be.
no.
Right.
They'll
So-
put it on the side.
So why, I mean, these spaces were originally designated as areas for storage. The reason that we did that was because we didn't want to have the building being used to this extent. So my question again is, why can't they meet, I'm sorry about saying the community center, that was wrong, but why can't they meet in the basement of the temple?
Temple normally priest uses for temple activities, not for meetings. Since front residence is where priest and the caretaker lives, it felt if there's a small meeting place where even trustees can come and meet, we don't have to go either to the big hall rooms or in the temple dining area. It just makes it a little more convenient for few people to meet where the resident and priest lives and the caretaker. That's really.
Okay.
How many people would you normally expect at these meetings?
Well, our trustee is about 24 people, so I would say 30, 40, not more.
And again, those meetings are either after services on a weekday night or on a weekend when,
Mostly in the weekend or maybe, after.
and again,
service.
not when there's major holidays, you're not meeting and conducting
No.
temple business in the
No.
basement. Okay, the other question that arose and some of the board members had issues with was the upstairs that we're proposing. Can you indicate the thought process of the Board of Trustees in requesting this of the board?
Yes, so we have sometimes visiting religious speakers maybe, and also sometimes we have some of the very senior members who doesn't drive at night. So there was feeling that sometimes the lunar calendar temple activities in the evening, and they really can't drive at night, so their family member have to come and pick them up, and who don't often live with them, children, So between the religious speakers or some seniors for the night during religious event, if they can stay at night, next day morning they can drive back home. And also we have people coming from much farther places, so it's hard for them just to take a taxi and come there. So, it's not a fancy place, and I don't think any of the member would have planned to spend the night there unless, So it is really for convenience and the safety of our very older, because when we started, we had a lot of senior members who started this, and they are now at an age that often at night they are not comfortable driving. And not all, many of them come with families. It just would be, and then we have, as I said, some speakers, religious speakers come to the temple. And so this is for short 1-2 night stay for the speakers, and for the senior members, if they attend that night, having few rooms would help that to come and safely.
And this is an accommodation to some of your elderly members, you're not charging anything for that?
No, because they are attending the religious ceremonies.
And it would be 1 or 2 nights at most when you have night events?
Right, it's probably for the night events when we have the night evening calendar based on it.
So 8 seems like a lot. It seems like a whole lot.
Okay, there's no magic number for 8, I agree with you. Only reason 8 came when we asked the architect, because of the foundation, make it look like, he said, and we needed bathrooms. We said, we'll put a small elevator, because many have knee problem, they can't walk through. So just a temporary, so 8 room happened to be in the square feet.
How many square, I was going to ask, how big are these rooms?
I think architect, maybe Mr. Mistrik, and I don't remember exactly.
We can call him back. I don't have the exact square footage, but.
So it's like those rooms, and there is some bathroom in between them. So if it is 6.
So how many bathrooms are there?
4.
Four bathrooms
The Jack
and
and
8
Jill.
bedrooms.
Right, in Jack and Jill bathroom.
Wow.
So.
Sounds like the kind of place that if you want to change your mind, you got to go outside. Not enough room.
Oh, this is for, as I said, only senior members who just come for.
Mr. Mister indicated to me, and as part of the application, the bedrooms are about 12 by 12. They're just basically a residential bedroom. It's not like a hotel room or anything of even that size. They're 12 by 12.
Those are additional, is that the total bedrooms for the house?
No, downstairs there are 2 apartments, one for the caretaker and one for the priest. And there's bedrooms downstairs. Each of them have their own, and those were approved in 2009.
Right, those were approved in 2009 because there's only 2.
Yeah.
So now we'll have 10 bedrooms in this building.
Per,
How many bedrooms are in each apartment?
Okay, 2 bedroom downstairs are for permanent residents.
Yeah, but
Okay, these ones upstairs are
You
just.
got 12 bedrooms.
there's 2 bedrooms in each apartment.
Right.
You got 12 bedrooms altogether.
Yeah. Again, if the board feels that 8 upstairs is too high, we can reduce the number. We felt that, we can make the rooms bigger and do it that way.
Yeah.
Is there also, there's going to be an elevator in this building for the people to get up and down?
Yeah, because the whole purpose, if the seniors go, they need an elevator, their problem need, I have heard from the members, and that's why.
So is there also going to be, so what happens when they wake up in the morning and their own little room, and they avail themselves of the bathroom, and then what do? Do they then
They
have to
park
go?
the car there night before,
Right,
so they
right.
just drive back home.
So they go out and so they're not going to stop and have breakfast or spend the whole day and.
There's no eating facility, they can go eat outside on the way home. No, that's not, yeah.
Feels like a giant bed and breakfast to me.
It is not.
There is no breakfast, who is going to cook breakfast for them? There's no.
Well, that was the last part of it. I had to figure that part in.
But isn't there a kitchen up by the 8 bedrooms too?
It just if they are, because the design, if somebody wants to make a tea, if they want to, warm water, but.
We go, bed and breakfast.
No plan for making, cooking there or breakfast there, no. Again, if you think it's too many rooms, we can, it just, this is honestly how the plan felt the need was to help the seniors so they don't really, because.
That's an interesting point. I mean, you can say it's too many rooms, but it's still the same space.
Yeah.
Make the rooms bigger, you still get the same amount of beds, potentially.
Well, no adult will share the room
No,
with other people.
Had you considered, instead of bedrooms, making that your conference room instead of the basement?
Again, the whole idea was for the upstairs room expansion, it don't pay off, spend the money if the seniors, because seniors thought it would be nice if they could, don't have to drive at night, from the temple. So creating a whole second floor for conference room didn't seem like.
I just have a question about, so you have 4 states, it's a regional, so you have people coming,
From Pennsylvania.
driving 8 hours to get there, so I mean,
Well,
5 hours,
okay.
5 hours?
Okay, major holiday, they make, again, when I say Pennsylvania, you go 78 west, you
Yeah.
drive it 2 hours, you're in Pennsylvania. Obviously, they are not coming from Pittsburgh, most stuff, and it is, but they do come from New York City, some would come from maybe Rockland County for major events.
Connecticut,
Yes,
yeah.
and Connecticut, in the lower part, maybe
When the
Stanford
group
and-
selected this site, were they from this area, or were they from all over the place?
Our membership is now from this tri-state.
Now, but when it started,
Yeah.
when you decided this
It's-
site,
It's now about 70% from New Jersey, 30% from, obviously, geographic distance attracts more people locally than,
Yeah.
but there are no other Bengali temples, so.
so you've adapted the needs for the whole area to take
For-
care of the people. for the-
I mean, if someday if Connecticut, they want to have their own temple, right now, this is only one temple.
This is it.
Yeah, this serves the 3 or 4 state area.
We were the lucky ones, yay. We have a lot of regional churches here, if you haven't noticed.
Now, again, it's depending on how communities, it's not easy to build
Yeah.
centers, so.
Got it.
Finished?
I'm finished with this witness unless,
Any other board questions?
I just got a couple quick ones here. Are there any outside activities that go on?
no, and the previous resolution of approval prohibited any outside activities, and that would
No
remain.
outside speakers either?
No outside speak, nothing. And actually, that was sort of a crux of a problem way back when we didn't have our COs for the annual high holidays. They did do some things outside. That's all been stopped, and everything is done inside.
Any other questions?
One,
Open to
Chairman,
the-
one question. So when you indicate that for this one major event, 5 to 6 days, I think the traffic report indicates that's in the fall. When you say that the main or the peak attendance is 1,000 people,
No, not peak, the daily cumulative,
That's my question.
yes.
That's exactly why I'm asking this question, because the traffic report says peak attendance is approximately 1,000 people. So then my question is, does that mean peak attendance at any one time?
No.
Or is that the cumulative number of people
I
who
think
during the day at some point might be there?
Right. It's a cumulative day, the peak time could be 600, it's hard
Okay.
to, and it could be 2 hours in the middle, all of a sudden, everybody, and that's why we try to control it, because we can't predict which time, normally in the weekends, that's when we
So the
expect.
testimony is throughout the day
It's
would be
open,
would be the max, and at any one point, it would probably be about 600.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, because temple inside cannot take more than really 200-300
Thank you.
people.
Okay, we'll open to the public. Is there anyone who'd like to ask a question? Okay, we'll close. Next.
Ms. Darwin?
Solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth,
Yes, I do.
and your name for the record.
Elizabeth Dolan, Dolan.
Ms. Darwin, you're an engineer licensed in the state of New Jersey, specializing in traffic?
Yes.
Senior, we've heard. We accept.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Darwin, either you or Mr. Dean from your firm have been involved with the Ananda Mandir facility since its inception, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it was asked by the board for you to analyze the operations of the church, or the temple, and to review the parking needs and parking requirements of the temple and the functionality of the temple. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in preparing your report, you've had, on more than one occasion, meetings with representatives of the temple to review their religious calendar, their daily activities, and how their events function. Is that correct?
That's also correct, yes.
And as a result of those meetings, you prepared a report dated August 16th, 2017. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And can you summarize, and you also were here this evening to hear the testimony of Mr. Rakit concerning what goes on at the temple.
I did hear that, and I also reviewed the meeting minutes from the last hearing that I did not attend.
Okay. And can you summarize, based on your discussions, what you feel the appropriate needs of the temple, the community hall, and the religious holidays are for the temple, and how they're managed?
Certainly. Based on the existing operation and the hopeful increased operation at the community hall, we looked at the parking in terms of the requirements by ordinance, which essentially look at a cumulative use of all of the spaces that have been discussed. So 200 spaces required for the temple, and you heard that that is an appropriate supply for the temple. The community hall requires 228. That dining area in the basement, 24 spaces. The 2 apartments that we just discussed require 4 spaces. The 8 bedrooms that are proposed for the senior members require another 9. So the total parking requirement we have is 465 as a requirement. There's 206 that have been constructed and another 117 that were approved as banked. And now that the community hall is active and, as you just heard from the applicant, they're looking to attract some larger crowds, and so the parking that exists on site somewhat limits the attendance level in the community hall. So although there's a variance because we're assuming that all of the spaces within the different buildings might be occupied simultaneously, what the applicant is really looking to do is build the banked parking that was previously approved as banked parking and create an on-site supply of just in excess of 300 spaces. And that would not only help for the peak annual 5 or 6 day major holiday, because it would provide another 117 spaces on the property, but it would then accommodate higher attendance functions within the community hall. We talked about 818 occupants as a maximum. That would, at one space per 3 people, require about 270 spaces. You heard from Mr. Rackett that they're looking at maybe 600 people. And if you look at a little bit more conservative vehicle occupancy of 2, that's 300 spaces. So I think that we're trying to achieve a higher number to get closer to the ordinance requirement, but functionally we're looking to have a bigger on-site parking supply so that we can accommodate bigger attendance or higher attendance levels at cultural presentations or social events in the community hall.
Now, you also talked to Mr. Rakit and heard his testimony this evening concerning the high holy days and what he is doing with the municipality as far as meeting with the municipality and filling out the appropriate paperwork. And even if the bank parking spaces were to be constructed, in your opinion, does that protocol need to be followed in the future to ensure that there is adequate parking either on-site or off-site for that 1 week of the high holy days?
That protocol should continue. There should be an arrangement for off-site parking and police presence for this highest holy day of 5 or 6 days.
And yet, for the remainder of the 300 and some days of the year, with the bank parking being constructed, in your opinion, and based on the testimony of Mr. Rakit concerning the operation of the facility, how it operates now, do you feel that the facility can operate properly and efficiently with the current parking plus the bank parking?
Yes, with the exception of that major holiday, the additional parking will satisfy the activity at the temple and at the cultural center. And while we have a deficiency from the ordinance, that ordinance calculation assumes that the temple and the community center and all of the other spaces would be occupied simultaneously, which doesn't happen. And if you think about the priest as just the one person who lives there, he's required to have 2 parking spaces, and if he walks over to the temple, his occupancy requires a portion of a space at least there, and if he's in the community center, another space. So for one person, there's a requirement of a few parking spaces, and that's simply not how this site works. All of the space won't be occupied simultaneously, so we don't need the full parking requirement based on those calculations.
So this is a point that the idea that not all the buildings are being occupied at the same time is something that has been a little bit of a theme tonight. So I don't know whether I have a question for our attorney or our planning board or planning official, but what happens if they suddenly break their traditional approach and they start using both the temple and the community center at the same time? Can they get a fine for that? Did they get a ticket issued? Or do we just say don't do that again? Or what happens?
Well, if they were to use them at the same time in a manner that people didn't see, it's pretty hard to enforce.
Right. So let's not use that. Let's use the one where it's right out in front of your face.
We have had situations at facilities, at places of worship like this, where they violated a condition like that and had an event where they weren't following the operation as indicated in the board's approval. In addition, had other violations in terms of fire and construction, and we shut them down. We shut the event down. That has happened.
Okay. So and when you shut it down, do they get a ticket and then they have to go to court, or?
Well, zoning is one thing. They basically are given a zoning violation, and if they do it again, it can go to summons and court and fines. Construction and fire prevention have more stringent, and they can fine, construction, for example, they can fine $2,000 a day for every infraction.
Right. Okay, thanks. I just was very curious about that.
I also hear mention the figure 800 people, something.
Yeah, the maximum, and this was testified to by Mr. Mistry, and I do have the paperwork, when the CO was issued by the construction office for the community center, the CO indicated that the maximum capacity for that building was 818.
Your testimony is that there's adequate parking for 800?
Yes, I had used one space per 3 seats. That gets you to 272.
And maybe this is mixing apples and oranges, but the place you were referring to, Mark, as being shut down was this facility, wasn't it?
This is an example of one where that has happened, yes.
What causes us concerns?
Yeah.
Now you hold 800 that site.
Mr. Thomas, let me back up. The issues that existed at this facility were before the buildings were completed. And they had crowds there that were larger, well, then...
That's why I asked the question. What
Right.
the plan is. And the other issue is what my concern is, that it's done, and then we pick up the pieces afterwards.
Well,
that's what I don't want to see happen in the future.
And that's why we're trying to clarify everything. And I think once we got the buildings up and running, the program there is in comportment with the previous approval. The real problem is, again, the 200 spaces that we currently have in place will work for almost most of the year. The additional spaces are needed for the community hall, and we understand, and we are working with the municipality now for those high holy days for the off-site parking. And that's where the problems were. The problems were not generated as a result of the community hall. The problems that were generated as a result of the fact that the high holidays were taking place, and we did not have a CO for the expanded temple. And then, people showed up and couldn't get into the temple, so they were outside. And there were problems. But that was before all of the work was done. Now all of the work was done, and in the last few years, there haven't been problems. And I think what we're doing and what we're demonstrating is that we will not have problems once all of this parking is constructed and once we finish everything else up. And again, we are restricted as to what we can do. We're not looking to change it. I think the testimony is pretty clear that the occupancy of the temple is the same as it was many years ago. We're not looking to expand that. But we're looking to operate the facility so we don't have traffic problems, we don't have neighbor problems, we don't have noise problems, and we don't have any other issues that are going to require fire, code enforcement, the police, or anything else to have to come out to these facilities. It shouldn't happen, and it hasn't happened recently, and it shouldn't have happened in the beginning. But again, it's been clarified, and I think with these changes that we're proposing, we probably will not have any issues going forward.
Well,
Do you have the
thing
CO
that concerns me is, Ms. Dolan made a comment early on in her testimony that this is a proposal to attract higher attendance at the community center. It seems to me this organization needs to build and function to service the existing membership, not worry about attracting more people to a place that can't handle.
I think what, as Mr. Rakit said, we have a community hall that has a certificate of occupancy for 818 people. events larger than that, we can't have there. The testimony was, if we have an event for 600 or 700 people, we can't adequately park that event unless we build the bank parking. But the testimony of Mr. Rakit and Ms. Dolan is that if you build the bank parking, then we can adequately function in the community hall.
Give us, or at least forgive me my concern, because once it's going and operating and it works fine, then it's fine. But if it doesn't work fine, then there's nothing we can do about it at that point.
Well,
And there's a little apprehension here, to be honest.
well, the issue is we are constrained. We are constrained by certificates of occupancy, occupancy codes, and by your resolutions. We can only do what you allow us to do.
But as you're representing your client and you're speaking for that client, do you represent that client understands that there are restrictions that they must operate under?
I have been involved in this project since the community hall phase and the temple expansion phase. At the beginning, when things were a little bit chaotic, quite frankly, the rules weren't abided by. And I'm going to be honest, I get phone calls, and sometimes I think, the municipality thinks once he's my client one day, he's my client forever, because anytime a client steps out of line, I get a phone call even if it's 5 years later, but that's another story.
That's correct. That's exactly what we believe.
But the reality is, there were issues during the construction of the building. There were issues when we were trying to operate the temple and construct at the same time. Now that we've gotten the CO for the community hall, and the only reason we don't have the final CO for the temple is because we haven't completed the last rights room, which is before the board this evening, but everything in that building is done. So, and they understand the protocols now. They understand the resolution. We've had numerous meetings here in the municipal building with zoning and planning. We've had meetings with my client at the site on numerous occasions, and in developing these plans to clean up all of these last issues, we understand what we can do, what we can't do, and how we must operate. And that's why we came in here, and it took a while to deal with all of these items to make this place run efficiently and properly.
Okay. She's still testifying, right?
I don't have any further questions of her, but if the board does.
Any board questions for traffic? Open to the public. Is there anyone out there who'd like to ask questions for this witness? Okay, we'll close. Next witness.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a few questions of both the applicant and perhaps the traffic engineer? So just to clarify, so that the one large event, even that, the hall and the temple are not used at the same time?
No, the way it works normally, after the religious event ends toward the evening, that's when they move to the cultural hall.
What's the occupancy of the temple?
Temple is about 200, right?
Okay.
But cultural event for that day, people don't stay whole day. The people who come in the morning or day, they don't stay for the cultural events. Only people who comes towards the end of the event who wants to stay, watch for the cultural event. This is often children's and play. So on those high holidays, this is kept. So people who wants to watch the cultural event, they normally come in the temple at the evening time, and that's they say 200 people around, 200, 250 probably, I would say. So it's really not, the high peak time for temple is based on the lunar time. It could be 4 in the afternoon, and they don't come and stay till the evening program. So it just sequentially, it happens, cultural event only toward the end of the religious services. And whoever that time in the religious services, they go there and watch.
For the use of the community hall, so we've established that that's only for members. Just curious, do you charge
No.
for the use? Okay. Nobody ever pays to use that. If they're members, they can use that for a wedding or something?
Well, if members, they normally will, cater food, then we come to the health department and,
But you don't charge members to
no,
use?
no.
Just to clarify, because this was one of the issues that came up during one particular event, for your special events, and particularly that event with that 5 to 6 day High Holy Day event, you're not going to have overflow parking on the grass? Or anywhere that's not paved parking?
No, since, I want to go back, I know there's a concern and it's legitimate when it happened, that construction time, temple was half closed, so it was an unusual circumstances, and we all lived through that. So we have no plan to, not to follow resolution.
So you're not gonna have anybody park anywhere other than the
No, we
paved
keep
delineated
our
spaces?
volunteer also crew to show people to go to the back of the parking, yes.
Okay.
It's good for us and the people also, they know that way everything is safe and.
Okay, and then one last clarification. Ms. Dolan indicated a parking requirement of 465, which is what's indicated on the on the site plan. In my report, I noted that the actual required parking is 656. And I have a footnote in here that explains why that is, but the parking requirement is 656. And that's based on, because you're adding these additional spaces that they're movable chairs. We used the one for 15. Mr. Lanford, if you have a different opinion, my report was March 16th. You should have offered it then. It's 656 is the required number of parking spaces.
If you, Mr. Haley, if you feel the number is 656, we're asking relief from 656 down to whatever, down to the
323.
323.
Okay, any other questions?
And I guess we never did touch on, if we have 1,000 people coming there in one day, how's that going to affect Cedar Grove Lane?
That, I guess, has been worked out over the past few years, and that's why the police department is involved, because we need to be able to manage getting the traffic in and out.
It's Elizabeth Avenue, not Cedar Grove Lane, but
I'm sorry.
what happens is when we have the annual event, and this is done with the Jane Center, this is done with now all of the houses of worship that have large events as part of their religious cultural activities. They are required to fill out an application to the municipality in advance of the event. They come in and they meet with the fire department, the health department, the police department, planning and zoning. And they say, we're going to have the event from September 1st to September 8th, and this is what we anticipate, this is what's going on. And based on that, then the township staff says, well, you will need to have 2 police officers this time, 1 police, whatever it is that they feel is appropriate, and the house of worship is then required to retain them and pay for the police to direct the traffic and to move the cars to where they need to be moved. And also, quite frankly, with some of the larger events now, as the churches learn, when they send out the notices, they also indicate that, there is so much parking on site, and if they're coming later in the day, that the overflow parking is going to be at other places. And also, they now hire shuttle buses or vans to move them from the off-site parking back to the facility. There was just, as a matter of fact, last Saturday for the Buddhists, they had a groundbreaking ceremony on 27, and we had meetings with the municipality, and again, arranged for off-site parking, arranged for police, and from what I understood, the event, went off without a hitch. So, protocols are in place now in town to avoid traffic problems on whether it be Cedar Grove Lane, where there are a lot of churches, or Elizabeth Avenue, or on Route 27. So those things are handled pretty well.
Those
just to
things are
clarify-
starting to work. This facility will be expected to do that, correct?
And we are doing it. We have now for the last 2 years been doing it.
Are you also aware, and I don't know if this has any long-range impact, there is an active application for 40-some houses across the street with a driveway that's going to come out relatively close
It is not relatively close. We looked.
It's changing now?
No,
or-
no.
Well, I mean, it'd be better if it were lined up.
It's not even close.
Okay.
Several hundred feet.
It's several hundred feet away. The property across the street from us, I believe, is open space. Right across the street,
It's close, but there is more development, that's all.
yeah, there's 32 homes, I think? I can't remember.
I think it's 32. It's more than 1,000 feet away.
Okay. I said it may not have any.
Just to clarify, somebody indicated Elizabeth Avenue. It's Cedar Grove Lane. The site is on.
This is Elizabeth Avenue.
The Mandir.
Yeah. This is Elizabeth Avenue.
Ananda Mandir is 269 Cedar Grove Lane.
I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I sincerely apologize. Must be the other temple that's coming in.
Okay, anything else?
I just had a question about so there's a lot of people who have big events and they go to the police department. Do we have an event manager that reviews this? I mean, somebody who's trained?
You fill out an application. I don't know if you want to call it an event manager, and maybe Mr. Healy can explain. It involves the professional staff getting together, depending on the event, to determine what needs to be done to run the event successfully. Like I said, if you have, for example, tents outside, the fire department becomes more involved, and the health department gets more involved if you have cooking outside. If it's just things are inside the building, then the police department gets involved. But they all get together in a room and tell whoever it is that has these events how they're going to run their event.
Got it.
Any other questions? Next witness.
Public?
You did public. Mr. O'Brien?
Solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth,
I do.
and your name for the record.
Kevin O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N.
Still have the license?
I still do, Mr.
Take
Chairman.
your word for it, you don't have to
I'm
show
worried,
it.
Mr.
And all four of your extremities seem to be working as well.
They are indeed.
We'll go on from
I'm
there.
afraid Mr. Dominic may come in and frisk me, so I'm always ready.
Okay. Mr. O'Brien, you've been here through the testimony of the witnesses and also this evening, and also reviewed the minutes of the previous hearing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we are here today for a D3 variance. Can you briefly indicate to the board what a D3 variance is?
A D3 variance is for a conditional use, meaning that the use is allowed in the zone. However, it doesn't
Wait, it doesn't sound like your microphone's working.
How's this?
Much better.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shepherd.
You're welcome.
A D3 use variance or a D3 conditional use variance is one that is for a use that is allowed in the zone but does not meet all the conditions that have been set forth in the zoning ordinance by the township. This particular case, we don't meet the requirements for parking, and the addition of uses on the site that we're discussing this evening also exacerbate that problem.
Okay. And can you discuss with the board the uniqueness of this application and the D3 conditions, that variance that we're seeking?
I think in the prior hearing as well as this evening, you heard a lot of testimony concerning how this temple started and got to this point in time. I'm reminded of the religious institution I was affiliated with in my youth. There was a church founded in the 1850s. A school was put up next to it in the 1920s. In the 1950s and 60s, in rapid succession, we added a gymnasium, a community hall, an annex to the church because of the rise in participation. And that was all not planned, not thought of previously, but was in response to that participation. Here you've got the temple that was instituted some years ago. It's a very unique temple, as you've heard the testimony. In the Hindu religion, there are denominations that are guided by two things. The first is the deity that they honor, and the second is the geographic area that they come from. So in India, there are a number of various deities, and there are various numbers of places where people come from, and the folks in this particular temple follow this particular deity and come from the state of Bengali. The nearest similar congregation like this is situated in Houston, Texas. It would be almost like, from my experience, St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City being the only Catholic church until you get to Louisiana, in which case this is where you go. So everybody from a particular area would go there. In this case, as you've heard the testimony, people come from Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, because they can drive here and get to this location. They do have members of the congregation that live quite a ways away, but don't usually attend anything. So this is fairly unique because of that. People who will drive to this temple follow the religious observance schedule, which is dictated by the lunar calendar, which is what the Hindu priests go by in India, and they do the same thing here. And the lunar calendar could have a new moon at 4 a.m. or a full moon at 8 p.m. or anywhere in between. And the various observations are based upon those hours. So there can be some that will start in the evening and run late. And once you get into fall, which does not start till tomorrow, so we're still in summer, you've got darkness at nighttime, and you've heard the testimony that they are looking for a place above the priest's house where those folks who cannot make a convenient drive home can stay over through the evening, spend the night, and then go home the next day. So you've got a lot of, you've got growing pains, you've got a unique congregation, you've got a number of uses that were not anticipated when this first started out that have all come together at this point, and what they've tried to do in this particular application is wrap up those loose ends, discuss with you the needs that they see at the present time, and present that to you in this application. The master plan does have, in the community facilities element, a goal of provide community services and facilities to serve the needs of all current and future residents in the township, and a church, a temple being an inherently beneficial use, one that promotes the general welfare of us all, certainly fulfills that master plan goal of providing adequate community services to people. The municipal land use law is also supported by this application in sections A alpha to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of all lands in this state in a manner which will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. An inherently beneficial use promotes the general welfare. Item B, Bravo, to secure safety. The safety of their congregants is at stake here by allowing them to stay over and not get on the roads late at night when it would be quite conceivably unsafe for them. And item G, for golf, to provide sufficient space in appropriate locations. And I believe that this application is consistent with those passages. This is an inherently beneficial use in accordance with the state statute, and one that promotes the general welfare of all the people in the state. As an inherently beneficial use, one looks at the negative criteria through the SECA balancing test, that 4-step test that determines whether or not there's a negative impact. And the 4 steps are: first, you identify the public interest, which is an inherently beneficial temple. Second, identify the detrimental effects, and no detrimental effects have come out so far in testimony. The high holy days, of course, are going to have an attendance, a very high attendance. much like any other church or congregation or temple, that their high holy days or Easters or Christmases or Rosh Hashanahs, very much identical to that. Can there be any conditions imposed on this application? The board is going to make that decision as we go through this evening, and then weigh the positive and negative criteria. And in this case, I can't identify any negative impacts, so I believe that the provision of a temple as a religious institution outweighs any detriments. We also have to prove the positive criteria, which by showing you that we meet the goals of the land use law, we meet the goals of the master plan, we've done, and we believe that the site remains suitable for the use that was originally approved by this board, despite the deviations, because this makes the temple more suitable for the practice of the Hindu religion. And I would conclude, if I may, that I believe that this application can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantial impairment of the zone plan and the zoning ordinance.
The trouble I have with that presentation is that it is based on the temple. Your argument essentially says where it makes it look like what you're doing is you're asking to put up a temple, and that's what you're claiming is the inherently beneficial use. The temple's already there. I think you've had that chance to make that argument. Now what you're arguing is that you want to add some more parking spaces. You want to add 8 bedrooms to make a total of 12 bedrooms on this particular location. You want to take space which we've already identified in 2 locations as being more appropriate or as we've required be storage rather than active spaces, and you want to start to use them for other things. The only thing that I listened to that sounded like it was part of the temple was the expansion of the last rites section of the temple. But it seems to me that they're asking for some things here that, as our planner said in his report, he's never heard of putting bedrooms into a space like this. Now, you may, since you talked about St. Patrick's and the Catholic religion, you may say, well, you know, what happens is that or in the Protestant, you'll have a manse or a house next to the church that the family of the pastor occupies. But, you know, it isn't like people coming in for a day or two and then clearing out and going somewhere else or staying for night. This is a very, very unusual application, and it's unusualness that raises at least my anxieties about doing this. Plus, you're pushing the edges of space that we had previously designated as storage space, and now you want to use them for something else. Well, what is that? How do we adjust to that? How do we say to ourselves, okay, well, we'll let you do this, and then you're going to come back again and say, well, you know, we want to add these other things. As Mr. Thomas pointed out, we think that this space is just about built out. And it's a little bit anxiety-provoking to be adding so much collateral uses and space to an area that's already been created and already contains a space that, as Mr. Mystery said, can hold 810 people. So that's it's not. I'm not comfortable with this, and I'm not comfortable that what you just said answers all of my concerns or does it in a way that really addresses what's going on here. You've basically cloaked the whole thing as a temple, and that's not, in my opinion, what's happening.
I think that...
I did also, in line with that, I would have the question that I agree that the temple in the original application was inherently beneficial, but I'm not sure how the changes we're talking about tonight are to be considered inherently beneficial.
Well, let me go back, and I'm going to sort of interrupt Mr. O'Brien a little bit, since I've been with this project from the beginning, and Mr. O'Brien is the new kid on the block. And, you know, the concern that you raise concerning overutilization of the site If you go back to the original approval, this site is covered by buildings at 4.78%. The zone requirement is 10. We only have 4% of building coverage. We have a zone requirement for churches of 120,000 square feet. This site is 406,999 square feet. It is basically 3.5 times larger than the zone requirement. The impervious coverage, and we have pervious pavers there, the church requirement is 40%, and we are at like 28%. So the site is not, in essence, overbuilt or overdeveloped. The question of, and let's take them one at a time. The use of the second floor of the residence, while in many instances churches have rectories or convents for the nuns, where there's a school where they reside, they have rooms within those for visiting nuns or visiting priests. To the extent that there's additional rooms within the confines of a residence for visitors, and as a matter of fact, this board, if I remember correctly, with the application for the Rutgers Chinese Church, approved some rooms for visiting clergy members on the property that they acquired from Henning's Florist. And there was an approval for, now, the only difference in this case, and if the board feels it's inappropriate, is that members of the congregation can stay over. But if they wanted to put rooms above, add onto that house for visiting clergy members or speakers, I think that would be accessory to a house of worship. And I don't think there's any question about that. For members of the congregation, if the board felt that that was inappropriate, the board can deny that request. But I don't think they can necessarily deny the rooms. The number of rooms can be in discussion. With respect to the parking, you know, Mr. Healy just said, by virtue of the way they interpret the ordinance, we are required to have 600 some parking spaces. All we're doing is seeking to build the parking spaces that are allowed pursuant to the ordinance to bring us up to 300 and some parking spaces, which is still deficient. It's sort of disingenuous for you to say, well, you know, you're overusing the site. We designed the site for the build out of the parking at 378. We sized the detention basin for 370 some parking spaces, or 330, whatever the number was. And now we demonstrated, and we banked them because we didn't think initially we needed them. And now that we need them, and we come to you and say, hey, your ordinance says 600 spaces, and you know we think we need the other 100 and some that we didn't build, you're saying, well, you're overusing the site. Well, we're only seeking to use what was originally approved back in 2009, now that we feel we have the need for it. So I think, you know, the parking, by ordinance, we should have more parking. And the situation is, based on Ms. Dolan's testimony, the parking that we will have will adequately service the proposed use for all year round, except for the high holy days. And if you're concerned about the site not functioning properly and having issues, then you don't, that would happen if we don't build the bank parking spaces. You're basically creating the problem.
Let me clarify.
Anybody's arguing about the bank parking spaces, but that site is heavily developed. You have a huge detention basin. You have the berms around the border. The only place, if you showed 3 years from now you needed more parking, the only place that I can see that you can put any more parking is the 1 acre plot on the side that you bought after the fact, after the temple was built and added to the property. It is a tight, and it's tight. If you have that parking lot filled, it's a tight place.
Let me clarify two things, just for the record. I believe I heard Mr. Lanford say that your impervious is 28%, where 40 is permitted. plan says 37. So I think that's what I heard. So just to clarify that they're at 37, they're at 40. So that's speaking to the chairman's point, at least as far as impervious, you're near the max that you can be in terms of how much of the site you can disturb. With regard to the parking, the board approved previously the number of spaces that were on here minus the 117 land bank spaces based on the testimony that was provided to the board at that time for the nature of the operation of the site and the nature of the special events as testified to. So that's why the board at that time said you don't have to improve the 117 spaces, because they were told we're only going to have X number of people at events, and the applicant's traffic engineer reiterated that in their testimony. Now the applicant is, as part of the application, is changing, and one of the main things in terms of the operation that they're changing is this one larger event. That is a change that you are proposing. Everything else, as far as the testimony that was provided about the 20 to 25, 50 to 150, that was consistent with what they had presented previously. I think 2 or 3 events in the fall where it was up to 300, that was also previously testified to. This one major event, that was not indicated in the previous. So just so you understand, that is part of the proposal that they're presenting tonight. That was not presented when it was approved back in 2009, was this one larger event with the attendance up to 1,000.
I think that there was testimony in 2009 of a larger event in the fall. The number was never near the 1,000. You're correct, Mr. Healy. But the testimony was that there was a major high holy day in the fall. We did not envision a number of 1,000. You're absolutely correct.
I'm making sure the board understands what they're being asked to approve. That's all.
Right. But again, you know, you're going around in a circle. I mean, if we do have a community hall that we have built, that this board approved the community hall, and the community hall holds 818 people, you need to park for the 1,818 people when people come. To say you can't build the bank parking spaces really doesn't make any sense. Now, if the board says we don't need this or don't need that, we may disagree with you, but you know, we're trying to make the place functional. We are restricted as to the number of activities that can take place at the same time. So, for example, using the basement of the church, we already have a kitchen in the basement of the temple. It's there. It was approved, and it's been built, and it's constructed. We're looking to put 70 chairs there so people don't have to stand up in the lobby of the church and eat after religious services. They're the same people that are upstairs that are coming downstairs on those Saturdays and Sundays or whatever days they have their services. It's not adding any more people. It's not adding any more intensity. It's just trying to make the place more functional. Using the basement of the house for a gathering place for the trustees or for the priest to meet with members of the congregation or the family, rather than walk up and open up and turn on the lights in the community hall, which he could well do, doesn't add to more people or doesn't add to the facility. It's just making it more functional. Rather than to say the priest has to go up to the community hall and lock it, we can use the classroom to have a meeting. They could do that, but it makes more sense if they, use the basement. It's the same people. It's not adding any more people. What we are proposing here with the community hall was what was proposed in 2009. What we are proposing in the basement of the church of the temple doesn't add any more people. The only thing that really technically adds more people to this site is the second floor of the residence. That could add potentially some people who are staying over, but they're there anyway. They're there anyway. And if the board has an issue with that, that's fine. But all of this that we're doing is trying to make the place work, not trying to make it expand or get bigger. We're trying to make it functional. We have the same people. Mr. Rakhi testified that the temple has 200 people. That was testified to in 2009. That number hasn't changed. All we're saying is that now we want them to go downstairs after services for fellowship and be able to sit down rather than stand up and eat food. That doesn't create traffic, that doesn't create noise, that doesn't create anything other than functionality. Same thing with using the basement of the residence. It's the same people that would be coming to a meeting of the trustees. They're either going to have the meeting in one place or another. If the board thinks it's inappropriate, I mean, the board can exercise that discretion and say, we're not going to grant that approval. But the reality is, all we're trying to do is make the place work properly, so some of the concerns that Mr. Thomas has and some of the other board members have go away. We're not trying to make the place bigger or make it more expansive. We're trying to make it work.
Just so you understand, I'm not opposed to you building the banked parking spaces. All I'm saying is, as a matter of fact, I think you need more space. And I hate to say this after the fact and everything, but 10 years ago, I don't remember, or whenever it was, approving a building with a capacity of over 800 people. Obviously, it was done. I think that, in hindsight, was probably a mistake, but it's here. That site can't accommodate it. Now we have to make it work, and I understand that. I don't agree with your reasoning with the bedrooms and comparing it with other religious institutions, because point out to me any other religious institution that provides bedrooms for people who are not clergy.
I didn't say that,
This is
Mr.
different.
Thomas. I did say that, Mr. Thomas. I said that is the only difference. I said if I suggested that we add some bedrooms for visiting clergy or visiting speakers, I think we would be entitled to do that. But if the board says we cannot have bedrooms to be used by members of the congregation, the board could take that position. And that is, to some degree, highly unusual. But again, given the nature of the testimony of the way this facility operates with some late evenings on the high holy days and the distance by which members of the congregation travel, the board can say, yeah, that's fine, or the board can say no. I understand that. But if I wanted to add 2, 3, or 4 bedrooms for visiting clergy or for speakers who come to the site, I think that is a permitted accessory use to a house of worship. So it's not the bedrooms that are the issue, it's who can stay in those bedrooms that may be an issue with certain board members.
Mr. Chairman.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, just you had indicated about the community hall. The 818 figure, I think what that comes from, that's the max occupancy per, I'm assuming, the fire code. But that was not indicated. Actually, what the applicant had indicated in 2009 was that the community hall had a seating capacity of 352 seats. So that's what was presented to the board in 2009.
That's what we approved, not 800.
That's what was presented to the board. Yep.
Good, I'm not totally losing it. So, when you throw that around, are you planning for 800 people, or are you planning for 350?
I think the answer is, and to be realistic and speaking to my client, we're planning for more than 350, but not 800. I mean, realistically.
Why more than 350?
Because there's seating capacity if there are weddings or cultural events. There's adequate seating capacity for 400, 500, or 600 people in the main floor of that cultural hall.
But it was approved for 350.
It was not approved. We showed seating in there for about 300, but there was no number placed on the cultural hall.
Maybe we should put a number on it then, and we're not going to be coming back 5 years from now and arguing again. 350 sure sounds a heck of a lot more reasonable to me than 8 or 5. You know, this is what makes this so difficult. We're all going around in circles because we find different facts, different things, and different numbers coming up all the time. It's more than frustrating, it's annoying.
Mr. Thomas, the real issue is, if you say to me now we're going to cap the community hall at 350 people, theoretically, then you made us build parking spaces for 600 people. We built a detention basin based on that. You made us build it, and then you're saying, well, you don't really need it because we're not going to let you put people in
Find
the
in the
building.
minutes anywhere where it was mentioned at that last approval, where there was any thought in
Actually-
anybody's mind of having 800 people?
No, there's
Okay.
not. And
We
as I
didn't make you build
As I
anything.
indicated before, the board actually granted relief in the form of parking, because that application also required a parking variance. The board actually gave significant relief for parking. Further, they allowed the land banking of 117 spaces based on the occupancy levels that was presented to you in testimony. So the board didn't make the applicant do anything. The board actually gave significant relief in
Yeah,
that
what you're
regard.
saying is we took the lowest numbers that were thrown out
You didn't give the lowest.
as far as
You took the
attendance
numbers
to
that were
allow the
presented.
banking.
You took the numbers that were presented to you.
Any other comments,
Yeah,
questions?
I just had a couple of comments. Just with respect to we're asked for a D3 variance for conditions. And from what I can tell, the conditions have been pretty well described, and I don't see any, the reasons for the conditions are pretty authentic to me. Just given that back then was then and today is now, and I think that it's Mr. Rakit pretty much described what the conditions now are, and you also pretty much described what they are now. I don't see any reasons that are causing a concern like safety or, they're not putting a school in for, for church school or, they're not doing anything other than planning for a very large event that's central to their religion. And that event is, it's got a very large service area where people come to it. And if it's successful and it's managed well, I don't see any reason we can't accommodate it.
That sounds like end of the hearing comment. Do you have any more witnesses? Or
I have no more witnesses.
first thing then we'll do is open to the public. Is there anyone who wants to make a comment? Or ask a question, but now you can make a comment concerning the application. All right, then we'll close. Now, if there's any board.
Just
more board-
one other thing, and that was the distinctions between the temple and the use of the temple and the community hall. And that the temple seems to be a little bit more sacred, it's smaller, and that the community hall is, it's a place where there's a whole bunch of interactions going on that aren't in that sacred space. That's all.
Other comments?
Yeah, I buy what you're saying about the functionality. At first, I was a little hesitant, but as Mr. O'Brien summarized, it seemed to all fall into place for me. So I don't see any reason why we can't allow this.
No?
I just wanted to comment on the pillars out front and the lighting of the sign. I'm just concerned about the level of lighting of the sign, so if you could just do like low voltage landscaping lighting of the sign.
Yeah, I think the testimony, and I can't remember what the street the property's on, but the testimony 3 months ago was that we are going to have just little floodlights shining on the sign. They're not going to be internally illuminated, and they can be low voltage, and there is landscaping around the pillars.
Actually, I was going to clarify, because I don't think you gave any testimony on the, you do need 2 variances for the signage.
Right, and I think Mr. Ford,
Mr. Ford provided
was a planner, is a planner, and he testified as to the rationale and the basis for that at the hearing in June.
Okay, so just to remind the board what that's about, is in the original plan, you had kind of a larger structure that was going to go across the, above the driveway, is that correct?
It was a large illuminated arch covering the driveway, and then we basically decided to get rid of that, and we have two
Smaller monument signs that need variances because you can only have one and they have 2, so, kind of 2 pillars to either side of the driveway, and you need a variance for the setback for that.
Any other board? Go
Just
Well, wait, one thing that has to happen is, Mr. Healy asked that you go through the conditions and figure out which ones stay from the original ordinances or approvals and which ones are different. Right, that's what you wanted to do?
And I think I might be able to, because there's literally probably 40 bullets here. I think I can walk Mr. Lanford through this. Starting on page 2, where it talks about attendance and events, those first, as I indicated before, I believe those 3 bullets there that talked about the events that are typical during the week, the 20 to 25 days per year, the 2 festivals, the 300, I think the testimony that I've heard tonight is consistent with all of that. Again, as indicated before, what is new as far as what was in the previous approval was this one major event, and the testimony was that there would be throughout the duration of the day, up to 1,000 people. At any one point, the maximum attendance would be 600. I believe, and Mr. Lanford, if you want to go through the different, proposed community hall functions would be for benefit of the members. We've had testimony about that. The nature of the activities there, I don't believe that has changed. I don't think activities in community center would end no later than 11. I've not heard anything to contradict that. The lighting, again, I think we had a little bit of testimony about that, but I don't believe I've heard anything to change any of those previous conditions, so those would remain.
Correct.
Basement, this is one of the changes that we've been discussing. As Mr. Shepherd was indicating, it was originally going to be, right now, the approval is that it's for storage only, and you've heard the testimony about how they want to change those 2 areas. There was testimony again tonight that there will not be any outdoor activities. We haven't heard, there was a condition that there can't be any, or there would not be any daycare facilities. Again, have not heard anything to the contrary. So we're assuming that would continue to be a condition of the operation of the site.
I think
no speakers. I think that was mentioned. No outside noise.
I think the reality is every condition that was imposed by this board in 2009 would still remain in full force and effect. We're not looking to change them except for the use of the basements and for that major event. I think the testimony in 2009 was that there was a major event, but I don't believe the number. I know the number wasn't up to 1,000 people because that wasn't the situation back in 2009. But those and the change in the gates, and I think that testimony was pretty clear at the June meeting as to why that was most appropriate. But all of the other conditions to restrict what we can or cannot do on the property, we are not seeking to change or modify.
Okay, all that being said then, if there's no further discussion, we need a motion and then maybe some discussion.
I would make a motion, but I'm going to make a motion that doesn't include all of the things that they've asked for. So if somebody wants to make a motion that includes all the things that they've asked for, they can go ahead. I was planning on making a motion that allows for 4 12 by 12 rooms upstairs, and will allow for the rest of the space upstairs to be used for meetings and other collaborative activities, but the downstairs would remain storage. I would allow the seats and tables in the basement of the of the temple. I would allow the sign, I'd allow the change to the last rites room, and the addition of the parking. If anybody wants to make a motion that's different than that, they can do that, or I'll make the motion.
Does anyone first of all, want to add anything to it?
Well, is that a motion?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to find somebody who wants to make a broader one.
I have a motion to approve as submitted.
Okay.
Your motion is what again?
Approve as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Raymond Betterman?
Any discussion that I have is I can go with that to a point, except I do not feel that the bedroom should be used other than for clergy and speakers, not for the general public. I would have a problem voting for that motion.
I'll amend my motion.
Anybody have anything else?
If it's a well-being situation that he described, of people traveling long distances
Right,
and then not
exactly.
being able to drive home. I
Yes,
mean,
I agree
I don't
with
know,
that.
they
I
may not
understand
be
that, but if I'm making
well
that
heeled
drive, I know ahead
for a
of time
hotel.
to make arrangements.
What's that?
I just think it's not in keeping with anything.
But it doesn't harm anything. I mean, it's a convenience for these people, elderly people, handicapped people, and people traveling great distances. And it doesn't, I mean, the impact is not great. It's not hurting anything.
That's not the standard. That's not what you're deciding on, though.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so you need to make the assessment that you believe that that's a natural accessory use. That's your argument. Okay, is that a natural accessory use to a church, a temple, a synagogue, to have non-clergy or non-speakers there? That you can't just you can't just say it doesn't harm anything.
Well, I don't know about the Indian religion. I mean, he says it's the case.
But did you hear testimony to that effect? What do you bank in your opinion on?
Yeah,
What?
some of the testimony.
What I heard was, it's a community. It's a religious community, and it's the community
Okay.
making an accommodation for elderly people and people who can't, who need to stay overnight, so.
Right?
But the motion's now been changed.
Yep. You need a clean motion now.
His change accepted by,
Well, right now, the motion is,
Cheryl's
As
motion.
presented.
as presented, is to limit who uses the bedrooms.
Clergy was broadly defined by the applicant. I think he testified that members of the hierarchy would be staying there. So I think clergy can be fairly broadly interpreted. And speakers.
Well, you can vote on this motion.
Okay, so Cheryl made the motion, and then she amended it based on your recommendation, but that wasn't a second.
second.
Okay. Hey, you can vote on it, or you can discuss.
I got, I'm gonna shut up.
Anybody have anything else to add?
So it's just the clergy.
Right.
But as Cheryl said, that's
Speakers and clergy.
speakers and clergy, but that's, she indicated it's pretty broad. So are we inviting
Let's put it
people
this
to?
way, nobody's going to be there inspecting it,
Right, that's what I mean.
and
So,
to do it otherwise opens it up to anybody.
okay,
Any other
I'll go
comments?
with that.
Okay, poll the board.
Raymond Betterbid?
Yes.
Bruce McCracken?
Yes.
Alan Rich?
Yes.
Robert Shepherd?
Yes.
Anthony Caldwell?
Yes.
Carol Bagallo?
Yes.
Chairman Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have one more on the agenda. Are we intending to hear that in its entirety, or?
This, I mean, this is your application, Mr. Lanford. It is
This would be Muslim Foundation Incorporated, ZBA,
No, you've already had your turn tonight.
It's,
17.
We're all worn out from this
Oh,
review.
I can't imagine we'd finish tonight.
This is a site plan with use variances in which the applicant proposes to construct a school, add parking, put up a fence, add an outdoor field, put up a sign at 4749 Cedar Grove Lane, Somerset, block 468.09, lots 37, 38, in the R20 zone.
And the applicant's attorney is proposing to use the men's room. Well, let's talk about what we want to do. I have 4 witnesses. Obviously, we are not going to get through 4 witnesses this evening. We will be, I will start the application if you want. If you want to defer it so we do it all in one night, we could do that.
Is there harm in putting it off to the client?
We own, not really, I don't think. Let me talk to, let's take 5 minutes and let me talk to my client.
We'll take a 5-minute recess. again, please, if everyone could find a seat. And let's see, we have an arrangement where we're going to hear the architect who's not available for the next available meeting, and then we'll adjourn the rest of the testimony to October. Okay, this is,
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Peter Lanford. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Muslim Foundation, INC, involving an application, I want to get it right, 47 and 49 Cedar Grove Lane.
That was the killer for the last one.
I'm not on the right street.
I've never seen you do anything close to that before.
It's been a long day. All right, the subject property is an existing mosque which was approved by this board, and I'll get into more of that detail at the next meeting. About 10 or 12 years ago, the mosque is in place. The mosque acquired a piece of land to the rear of the mosque.
excuse me, this was a planning board approval. There were no variances.
It could have been a planning board.
wasn't zoned.
Yeah, I did not handle that application. There is now a proposal before the board to construct a school to the rear of the subject mosque. We will, when this thing is fully presented, present testimony from a site engineer, traffic consultant, the applicant, and an architect. Since it is almost 20 to 10, I would like to just put the architect on because he has a conflict for the next hearing date, and then we will come back at the next hearing date to put the remainder of the testimony on. Again, there is a site plan which shows the building that we're proposing to construct is to the rear of the existing mosque. Mr. Mistry, can you be sworn, please?
Okay, we saw him before, right?
He was here as a witness in the Ananda Mandira
He's
application.
still licensed, right?
Right, but he's got to be still sworn.
I didn't swear him this time, though.
Right.
Solemnly swear affirm to the whole truth?
Yes, I do.
All right, state and spell your
And we'll
name.
accept him as an architect
Okay.
licensed in New Jersey.
Correct. Yogesh Mistry, Yogesh Mistry.
Mr. Mistry, you prepared the architectural plans for the school, is that correct?
Yes,
And this is a freestanding building that we are proposing to construct to the rear of the mosque.
correct.
And in conjunction with the application, you provided to the board floor plans and elevations for the building, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, and to our left is a exhibit that you prepared. Can you indicate to the board what that document is?
This is a 3D color rendering of the proposed school. It's taken from the front right corner of the building. This, again, is behind the existing mosque that's on the site right now.
I'm going to mark that A1.
All right.
Mr. Mistry, can you describe what the building will look like from the outside, please? Both as to materials, heights?
Sure. Can I run through just the inside of the building?
You want to do the
Yeah,
inside
yeah.
first? Okay.
So what we're proposing here is a two-story school building. It consists of 14 classrooms, a library, a cafeteria, a gym, some administrative offices and associated spaces, as well as other accessory spaces like toilets, storage, etc. The total square footage of the building is 31,795 square feet. It's broken up into two levels. The upper level, which is mainly what you see in the rendering, consists of 18,267 square feet, and there's a lower level of 13,528 square feet.
So the lower level would be the basement?
Yes,
But that will be usable space for the school, is that correct?
yes, it will be usable.
All right, can you indicate what activities will take place on the basement, what activities will take place? You described the number of classrooms. What's in the basement, what's on the first floor?
Sure, I'm just going to run through the floor plan. I'm referring to sheet A2.01 of the submitted architectural drawings. So the top of the page is the basement plan. There are 4 classrooms. There's a small library. There's a staff lounge. There's a small cafeteria, administrative offices, a nurse's room, common toilets for the kids, sprinkler, storage, server rooms, things like that. On the first floor plan, which is the bottom half of the page, just starting from kind of left to right, there's a gym / multi-purpose hall that's about 3,700 square feet, including, in addition, there's some locker rooms for boys and girls. There's 6 regular classrooms, and then there's 2 pre-K and 2 K or kindergarten classrooms. And then there's another set of toilets for the kids and some admin offices in the entry lobby. So the main entry is sort of all the way to the right of the floor plan, and on that rendering, it's kind of the closest taller item in the foreground. There's a set of steps that goes to the main entry, as well as a handicap ramp. The whole building will be handicap accessible.
So the gym is going to be built on a slab?
Correct. There's no basement level under the gym.
Okay, and speaking of the gym, it's not a full gymnasium with a basketball court or anything of that nature. Is it rather, what's the size of the gymnasium?
It's roughly 70 by 50, and there's a little additional notch, but I mean, it's not a full basketball court. There will be sort of basketball accessories, but not.
And basically used for physical education classes. Is not something that would be used for competitive athletic activities, correct?
No, it doesn't meet the size standards for.
Okay. Now, when we originally prepared the plans, the markings on the plans were basically for students pre-K through 5, and since that time, the plans, the building hasn't changed, but the grade levels have changed. Is that correct?
Correct. Initially submitted, it was pre-K through 5th grade. They redesignated some of the classrooms to be now pre-K through 8th grade. Same number of classrooms hasn't changed. It's just they've kind of redesignated some of the.
Well, it doesn't. I'm looking at the same one, A201.
Yes.
And I don't see where it still says 5th grade.
Correct. No, I'm gonna just.
Oh, you've got the special pieces of paper.
I'm going to move as Exhibit A2, the revised floor plans which show the classrooms as being, instead of through the 5th grade, would be through the 8th grade.
Yeah, this is just, it's an exhibit labeled A2.01-alt, and it just redesignates the room labels in some of the classrooms.
And let me hand that out, and then I'll ask a question. Other than the designation of the classrooms from up to 5th grade to 8th grade, all of the other dimensions and everything contained in A2 is the same as that was submitted in the plan set originally. Is that correct?
Yeah, just the room name changed.
Okay. Now, tell the board what the building is going to look like from the outside.
Sure. From the outside, I'm going to refer to the Exhibit A1, the 3D color rendering. It's a mix of stone, glass, stucco, some kind of metal trim pieces. There's also some exterior lighting. We kind of went for more of a modern appearance on the building to contrast the existing mosque, which is a little more traditional looking. We wanted it to just be different because it was a school and not necessarily the mosque. It's also set in the back, so I think from Cedar Grove Lane, you're really not going to see the building. but, at the same respect, we did want it to be somewhat attractive and have more of a youthful appearance. We did break up the volumes, kind of there's some ins and outs on the elevation to kind of, rather than just a single mass, and there's also some up and downs. I mean, the rear part of the building, you could see on that rendering, is a little bit taller gym, and in the front, there's a little bit taller entry piece. It's kind of a linear building that, with, kind of quarter down the middle and classrooms on either side, so.
And what is the height at the highest points of the building?
The highest point is actually the gym, and from average grade to the peak is 35 feet.
Okay.
So in terms of, it really appears more of a one-story building than 2 stories. The one other thing I wanted to mention was there is no cooking facility in the cafeteria. It's just going to be a sort of an dining cafeteria. They do have an existing full kitchen in the mosque, so if there will be any prepared food, it will be done next door and then brought over if they needed to. In terms of the occupant load of this, we estimated about 20 students per classroom. I think in our application we've listed 270. I mean, if you did 14 classrooms times 20 or 280, but I think they've estimated 270 to be the max. So.
The way I'm looking at this, it looks like they anticipate, you may not even know the answer to this, but it looks like they anticipate losing some students as they go through school. For example, there's 2 third-grade classes, but there's only 1 fourth-grade class.
Correct. After 3rd grade, they have only 1 class of each subsequent grade level. So 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th only has 1 class from each.
I have no further questions of this witness.
Board questions?
Question. Why did you decide to build a basement instead of a 2nd floor?
A lot of it had to do with cost of construction. There's a certain budget they're trying to meet.
Okay, so a basement is cheaper than a 2nd floor?
Yeah, because we would have to still do a foundation and all that, plus the 2nd floor.
Any other questions?
One question, if I could. So the square footage, it looks like, is staying the same, correct?
Yes.
Same within that same footprint that was in the plans?
Everything's the same.
The plans that were submitted were 12, and now it's 14, is that correct? If I didn't hear that.
So there's always 14 classrooms, I
Oh,
guess.
is that right? Did I miscount? So it was 14 on the plans that were submitted?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And so the 30 staff figure remains the same?
Yes.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is if the number of classrooms changed and if the faculty number was going up, that might affect the site plan, but testimony is it's staying the same. Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll briefly open to the public because he won't have.
He will be back at the next.
Anybody out there want to ask this witness a question based on his testimony? Then we'll close, and that would be it for the evening.
You have to come up to the microphone.
Oh, you have a question? Go to the mic and give us your name.
Okay, my name is Josefa Machowski. We live right next door. So this is a little, this is quite big for us. This is quite big for us. We live right next door. So that is our backyard. Even though it's woods, for us, this is our backyard where this building is going. Specific questions for him? I don't know. This is a lot for us to have this building. We already have the mosque next door. It's a lot of traffic. It's a lot of people in and out of there. You know, we moved there. It wasn't there. It was our peaceful, getaway. This is our property. This is our getaway. You know, now you're going to bring children there. Are they going to be there late at night?
Those are questions that he can't answer. Back to the next hearing with the rest of the witnesses. This is really limited to architectural concerns, what it looks like, which you will probably have a very difficult time seeing the building even.
No, I don't think I'll have a hard time seeing
No,
the building.
this is going to be behind the mosque.
Okay, so they're gonna build it. Now, what's that gonna do for the water flow into our
Those are
property?
all questions that.
That's not for
That
him?
are not his
Okay.
purview.
What was your name?
Questions, wrong
Josefa,
person.
Josefa.
Hmm?
Last name Michaelski. We live at 51 Cedar Grove Lane.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Anyone else? Okay, now we'll close to the public. And you said October?
It was October 19th.
Next hearing on this, for this applicant, October 19th, there'd be no further notice. Anything for anybody then?
Thank you for taking me tonight.
Okay. For a motion to adjourn.
So moved.